Today is Maundy Thursday, and we begin to journey the first of a three-part service called Triduum, a service that tells the story of the atoning sacrifice of Jesus made on our behalf, and that also celebrates the immensity of God's love. Love that clears the way for us to know eternal joy. Joy that we don't deserve, but are offered simply because of who we are, God's beloved. In my medieval liturgics class, I learned that at one time, all three services, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and Easter, along with the vigil there in the middle, were celebrated as a whole from start to finish. For 3 days, people would come together in community to hear the story and witness a reenactment of the Lord's betrayal, death, and ultimate resurrection. After sunset on the first day, which in Jewish tradition is the beginning of that day, their focus is on hearing how Jesus prepared his disciples for what was about to happen. They ate, they listened, their feet were washed, and then they prayed. Prayed for the strength, as did Jesus, for what lay ahead. Throughout the night, the choir would sing psalms. The Old Testament promises would be recited over and over, and there would be silence. Lots of silence. Like the disciples in the garden, in the silence, some would grow weary and fall asleep, while others, remembering Jesus' question to the disciples, "Can you not stay awake with me for 1 hour?" would in turn keep watch throughout the night. And then somewhere in the middle of the night, there'd be this commotion. And the person who was playing the role of Jesus would be arrested and thrown into a dungeon, later facing the chief priest and members of Sanhedrin. By sunset, the beginning of day 2, Jesus will have been convicted, crucified, and placed in the tomb. In modern times, we no longer spend 3 days in church. Sadly, many avoid the harshness of Holy Week altogether, choosing to jump instead from Palm Sunday right to the Easter morning. I get it. Hearing about that triumphant Jesus, be it his glorious entry into Jerusalem or his emergence from the tomb, is much more desirable than hearing the events that transpires in between. But without the entirety of the story Triduum tells, the good news of the resurrection is actually incomplete. While the resurrection demonstrates the power and faithfulness of God's love, what is missed by those who make that jump from Palm Sunday to Easter, something those here come to witness, is the outward demonstration of the depth of God's love for us. That which gives the resurrection its meaning. Tonight, during the first set of readings, we were reminded that on this night, as Jesus prepared himself for what was to happen during what we call the Last Supper, he first prepared and offered assurance to those closest to him. But when he says that he is a servant and not the master, he gets the deer in a headlight look. And then he does something even more amazing. He washes their feet. there is this sense the disciples just don't get it. How can the master be the servant? Jesus tells them it has nothing to do with such a relationship. At the center of service is not one's power or position, but love. Love willing to do for the other just because of who they are. He then tells his disciples they are to love one another just as he has loved them. Jesus goes on to tell them much more, describing what real love looks like and what it is capable of, assuring them that God's love for them is something they can rely on because it is as real as he is, standing right in front of them. Only later will the disciples understand that what Jesus is talking about is not washing the feet as an act of love or service, but describing the sacrificial nature of the cross. And not just the cross he will hang upon, but the cross they and we will bear, sharing what has been shared with them, with us. Love so great that it has the power to overcome any obstacle we face, even death itself. Following the meal, he shares with the disciples. Meal, he says, will be the reminder of the love he shares with those who receive it. He leads the disciples to Gethsemane, where he invites them to pray with him for strength. Strength they will all need to weather the coming storm. Like the disciples, tonight, we are invited to pray with Jesus as the events of the Triduum unfold before us. We may not be able to go to the Garden of Gethsemane, but we can sit in our own garden right here. In our chapel across from the office, the Altar Guild has put together a garden of our own. And on the altar tonight will be the bread and the wine we will use in tomorrow's services. That which Jesus said to his disciples at dinner would be the physical representation of his spiritual presence. Throughout the night, we are invited, as were the disciples, to sit and pray with Jesus for the strength we need to face the challenges before us. The good news is, even though it may seem like the journey we are on takes us through the darkest of times, we know how that story ends. And that our faith in God and God's promises will carry us, as it did Jesus, through it all. I encourage you to set aside 1 hour this night, offering your prayers of petition and thanksgiving before the altar of repose, entering tonight through the blue door on Thomas Drive. While we would like to provide continuous and prayerful presence here in the chapel, you may pray from wherever you are, for however long you can. Then if you're able, tomorrow come and join us in person at noon, or our 6:30 service in person or online, to hear and witness the story of love. Love willing to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves, simply because of who we are, God's beloved.